5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Coming to you from the colourful and smoky stage of the internet, this is the Mellow Dramatics. 3 insane minds discussing all things theatre. Now, shookers, and let's start the show!
Hello and welcome to the Mellow Dramatics. I'm your host, Benji Rag, with the diva Lauren Hargrud.
Hello.
We normally have a third person, Melanie, but she unfortunately can't be a part of this because her internet is shitty. However, I did get her to write down a lot of her answers and thoughts, and I'll be reading them out throughout the episode. So, Lauren, how are we today?
Fine as. Drinking some pink Moscato, so I don't know. Is that your answer?
I was going to say I'm pretty boozed up right now as well. So, drinking and theatre, it's a good combination. It's kind of the only thing you can do, like, in isolation, though, isn't it?
True. Apparently people are becoming alcoholics because of it.
I was watching a news story that was saying that certain people who are really struggling with this are former addicts because they're used to, like, a routine and it's getting
I can imagine.
broken up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, for one, am finding it very hard to process, because of my dad's death. My dad's not dead either, though,
I'm
so that's
sorry.
probably why I'm trying so hard to process it. So today we are researching and documenting the world of verbatim theatre. Did you like that intro, Lauren? Did you? See, researching and
beautiful.
documenting. Yeah.
Oh.
Verbatim theatre is a form of art where the playwright interviews people connected to a theme or a subject that is the focus of their piece, and then uses those sort of interviews and transcripts to form the basis of their play. In the strictest form, verbatim theatre makes use of people's real words and sort of doesn't edit them much. However, the form has changed over the years and will continue to change. So, Lauren, what are your thoughts on verbatim theatre before I get into the history of it?
I enjoy it. I was first exposed to it at uni. I didn't realise, but it was my first year of uni I was exposed to it. We had to interview a friend and then take on their persona from that interview. Later on in uni, my third or last year, our class did a performance that was verbatim. And that was when I really found that it was really interesting because we were doing a topic on perfection. And so that was when you could see the really outrageous and really interesting things people say in life. Someone interviewed someone and the guy was like, look at Stephen Hawking. That guy was like a genius, yet he was fucked because, his condition, right?
Oh my God, to be the doctor that diagnosed him with that. Stephen Hawking sitting down in a room. So, doctor, what have I got? Well, I've been through all this text. I've spent many hours reading journals. And in the actual vocabulary of my profession, you're fucked. Just give it to me straight, doctor. Oh, actually, I was meaning to tell you this at the start, but I'll tell you now. I watched Crocodile Dundee a couple of nights ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's a terrible fucking movie.
It's not the greatest. It's hilarious to watch with Americans, though.
It felt like it was every Australian stereotype at the start.
It is.
And then,
yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any better.
Yeah. And then him in America is just him punching people randomly.
I don't remember that part, but yeah.
That's just the whole movie. That's just him punching people randomly. There's like this bit where he meets a trans woman. I think the character hasn't met a trans person before. He goes up to her and like grabs her crotch.
Oh.
Just to like.
But this was also like in the 60s or 50s or whatever.
No, it's the 80s.
Not that I'm saying it's okay to do that, but like transgender wasn't really a thing then. They didn't
it's
know
the
much
80s.
about it.
Like they knew.
But it was very different to what we know now.
Yeah, but still, I think it was still kind of assault, and it's got a terrible ending. So, like, she like comes to, like he's gonna go off somewhere and see the rest of America, and like she like runs down to like stop him and confess her love. But there's like 1,000 people in between them, so she like gets some people to like call out to him, and they have like this conversation through yelling.
Oh.
And then at the end, he's like, he's like, I love you. And he wants to like go and embrace her, but there's like 1,000 people waiting for the train. So he just decides to climb on top of them and like walk across them to her. Just wait till the fucking train came.
Well,
she's not going.
Aussies, we're not great at waiting. It was an urgent matter of the heart, Benny. Have a heart.
Like when they asked him that's not a knife, this is a knife bit. I'm surprised the guy didn't shoot him. On to the history of verbatim theatre. Documentary theatre is sort of rooted in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, particularly around Russia, in the Russian Revolution. The USSR would give people these sort of transcripts of what the news is and propaganda and that sort of stuff. And these people would perform it on stage for them. It's sort of like when a current affair like reenacts different things. They dramatize it a lot. And that's what sort of happened with this, was that they would dramatize.
Yes, I know it well.
Yeah.
I have personally been on a current affair.
Oh, have we?
Yes.
Do I dare
Reenacting
ask?
a murder.
Oh.
Well, I had
were you the killer?
I was.
Oh, good. I can see that. All the bodies underneath your bed.
What bodies? What are you talking about? Cut.
I get the feeling I'm going to be doing a verbatim theatre piece on you.
I think I'm a psychopath. Last week you asked me if I'd murdered anyone, and I said I'm not going to admit that on recording, and now you're talking about the bodies under my bed?
I'm not going to lie that, like, during isolation, I was thinking about yesterday that serial killing has probably really taken a hit. Like, I don't think Ted Bundy could go out there and kill under these conditions.
But at the same time, everyone's in their home. You're not allowed to go and see anyone.
Yeah, but I mean, I only want to kill one person.
And they're actually dead, ooh.
I mean, I'd only want to kill one person, not an entire family. I'm very lazy and I just don't have the effort to kill an entire family. Maybe like over the period of a week. Yeah.
One a day keeps the doctor away.
So documentary theatre has been around since the 30s and 40s, but it's undergone a lot of changes as it goes on. One sort of interesting thing I sort of found out about this was that whereas in the 30s and the sort of 40s, documentary theatre was very much about getting the audience emotionally involved in issues and really having a connection with the audience. In the 60s and 70s, after Brecht came into things, documentary theatre came more about sort of isolation, more delivering the facts. Yeah, and more delivering the facts to the audience to make up their own mind. So as part of our investigation into verbatim theatre, we both chose a theatre performance that we'd like to look at. I chose My Name is Rachel Corrie. Lauren, what did you choose?
I chose Come From Away, which is a musical.
I'm very intrigued. So would you like to start us off and tell us a little bit about it? So
Come From Away is a Canadian musical, and it's written by Irene Sandkoff and David Hine. And it's
great people.
It's set in the week following the September 11 attacks. It tells the story of when 38 planes were ordered to land in the small town of Gander in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, because of September 11 they couldn't land in the US, so they were diverted to Canada. And so the musical plays out the story of what happened, because there were 38 planes with like 7,000 people landing in a small town which their usual population was 10,000, and so they had to accommodate an extra 7,000 and look after them over the course of a week.
I would have scammed them all.
Well, maybe some people did. I don't know. On their website and like advertising of the musical, it doesn't actually say anywhere, but I've found that Michael Rubinoff, who was a Associate Dean of Visual and Performing Arts at Sheridan College in Oakville, he was actually the one who came up with the idea first for the musical. And so he approached some different writers and eventually got to Irene and David and said, this is the idea, what do you think? And then they kind of took it on. But nowhere actually gives him recognition for that. It's all, everywhere else is just saying it's written by David and Irene, but nothing about this other guy.
It's okay. We will make him famous.
Yeah.
You're a bro, man.
And so then in 2011, on the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, David and Irene went back to Gander and they interviewed the locals and the passengers who returned, who that event happened to them when they were stranded in Gander. And so they interviewed them and then used that to create the story of Come From Away.
That's really interesting, because the Larrabee Project is another famous verbatim piece. And if you haven't read it, look it up. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone. But 10 years after the first performance, they went back to the town and re-interviewed everyone and added to that. At least I think so. If I'm wrong, call me out in the comments.
They're telling the stories of 16,000 people, but they're doing it in a time period of 5 days. So the musical happens over 5 days, but you go to one sitting of a 100-minute performance. And they use only 12 actors as like their main cast. So that was really interesting because 16,000 is a lot of stories to tell, yet you're only using 12 actors in 5 days. So the way that they actually, I guess, resolved that was some of the characters are a mashup of a few different people. So Beulah Davis, one of the characters, she's actually made up of a couple of different women, Diane Davis and Beulah Cooper, as well as the other women who were living in the town of Gander at the time. And then there's also other characters who are just have one name that are based on just one person, but they might have like elements of other people mixed into them. So that's kind of how they achieved that, of using all these stories but forming one character from multiple people.
So it sounds like it's more telling the story of the town rather than the residents.
Yeah, so the town and the events that occurred to them, they mixed that in there. So there was an interview I was watching. Once they'd done the interviews and transcribed them, they kind of looked at the different themes and looked at the different characteristics of particular people they'd interviewed and kind of squashed them in together. So like the theme of hope, if there were multiple people who talked about hope, they kind of became that one character. There was a roughness about one character, so she was put in to this character, but then there was something else, a different quality of someone else that was mixed in to make that other character, and they became the same person. And so in their casting process, particularly for the Broadway season, instead of casting for a lookalike or a particular look, they were more, I guess, casting for talent, which is interesting because they weren't specific. Like when you do a documentary, right, and you have a reenactment, you're going to look for someone who looks quite similar to the person, right? But in this case, they were saying they weren't actually looking for that. There was more the quality of that person because they were made up of those characteristics.
I was just thinking, there's a movie of the Laramie Project, and one of the things I hated about it was that they got big name actors to play all the roles. I felt it was very, it took away from the actual point of the film. Because when they were sort of no-name actors performing it on stage, you didn't see the actor, you saw the character they were portraying. But when you watch the movie, you just see like, oh, this is Steve Buscemi and he's playing this character. You don't see the character, which I think is a crime if it's a verbatim piece.
Another interesting thing was that, like, when you do a normal show, you don't get to meet the character because they're just someone in someone's imagination. But for the Broadway cast of Come From Away, they actually got to meet and spend time with the real people who their characters were based on. So that was really interesting. And so listening to interviews of the cast, they were saying, like, usually you don't get that, but this time we did, and we were able to not just use the imagination and the scripting of how to play a character, but we had those real stories that those people were telling us and what they lived through. And as well as that, I can't remember what year it was, but they went back to the town of Gander and did like a charity concert of the show. A lot of the cast were saying, like, that's really special to be able to go and show the people who, like, lived through this experience. They were able to see themselves portrayed on stage and, like, relate to those experiences.
And, like, the townsfolk were like, well, maybe this is the least you can do after that character assassination you call a play.
Yeah. That's what they were saying. Like, it's a bit scary when you think about it. There's some sort of expectation you have with verbatim because it's not just a character that's been made up. It's actually a real person and their real life experiences.
Yeah, well,
like you want to do that justice.
Yeah. Well, like one of our teachers who specializes in verbatim theatre, she one time told us that, like, she dreads any of her subjects coming to see her performance.
That was probably because one of the shows that she's done is based on eavesdropping of people's conversations. Yeah. And so, like, part of it's obviously going to be out of context and people might get really pissed off about what you say through that. That's actually something that I'm kind of dreading at the moment too, though, in a script that I'm writing that's verbatim. There are people in my life who there's stories that I want to convey, but I'm like, if this person saw the show or read this, would they get upset about how I'm writing this or what I'm writing?
Yeah. In a way, like a lot of plays are somewhat verbatim. I know in my plays, a lot of the stories that characters tell or a lot of the characters are based on either real stories or real people, I know.
Okay. I think that's just probably a common thing that writers and creatives do, because it's, I guess, an easy step to start with a character by basing them off someone who's in your reality. You can kind of go, I like that quality, and then maybe I'll use that, but not so much stay true to it, I guess.
Well, you have to draw from somewhere.
Yeah. They have won like a lot of awards. So in 2018, they were the longest running Canadian musical in Broadway history. In 2017, they were nominated for a lot of Tony Awards, and one of them was they won Best Director of a Musical for, I think his name's Ashley Christopher, the director. I will double check that. Christopher Ashley. And so he won that Tony Award, but he also won in the same year in 2017 Outstanding Direction of a Musical for the Helen Hayes Awards.
My play is My Name is Rachel Corrie. I can assure you it's an uplifting piece. I'll get into it. My Name is Rachel Corrie. It's a play based on the diaries and emails of an activist who went to Palestine to protest the demolition of Palestinian houses by the Israeli government, and she laid down in front of a bulldozer to stop it from destroying a house, and the soldier ran over her.
What nationality was she?
She was American.
That was going to be my guess.
After her death, the Israeli government conducted an investigation, and they concluded that the death was an accident because the driver of the bulldozer couldn't see her. Probably should maybe get out and check. I don't want to tell you how to do your job. Yeah. Well, that's sort of the question. So in 2005, Corrie's parents, the same year the play was released, actually, filed a civil lawsuit against the state of Israel. It basically charged Israel with not doing a credible investigation and causing her death. They were unsuccessful in that court case, and they also lost the appeal. Alan Rickman became interested in Rachel Corrie's death shortly after it happened. He, along with journalist Caroline Viner, asked the parents if they could have a look at the emails and the diary entries to make a play. They handed it all over. He took all that information. He approached the Royal Court Theatre about finding a way to sort of tell her story. And so Alan Rickman went on to direct the play. It's a very sort of tragic play in that you know Rachel Corrie is going to die. From the get-go, it's made very evident that she's going to die. But you're looking at a character who doesn't know their death is coming.
Oh, wow, yeah. Because you're reading her diary.
Yeah, you're reading it as it happens. And that's another thing I find very interesting about the performance is that it is taken from her diary, very much without her permission. But one question I always have in my mind is if she went to Palestine, protested and came back, would she allow anyone to see that diary? It's a very sort of invasive thing. Like the audience has no right to see what is being presented on stage because Rachel Corrie hasn't given her express permission. Yeah,
it's one thing to like give permission to tell your story, but it's another thing to go, here's my diary, like my very personal diary. Just read it, perform it.
And it's because of that, like, as an audience member, and I think this is actually a very good thing. You feel like an invader into her life. You feel like this is voyeurism. Like
voyeuristic,
you're not supposed to be seeing this. And of course makes it more and more tragic as the play goes on and you learn more and more about the person. Because by the end of the play, she is a very three-dimensional, free character. Okay, so this is one quote from a reviewer. What we see is a very personal side to this character. One wonders if we were ever supposed to see the private pages of her diary. The performance also challenges the audience to view the Israel-Palestinian conflict through her eyes. And that is another thing I'll get into later about verbatim, but we are looking at this conflict through her eyes, and she is shaping our view of it. I think that's a good thing because we're seeing what this conflict looks like to a young person who is protesting and how they view it. But there have been detractors who say that this play will encourage people to go out and protest more, and that also we're not getting the full side of the conflict because it's only through one person's view. But the play never promises to give you a full view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. These are two quotes from her parents. After Rachel died, we realized that her words were having a similar effect on others whose lives were being changed, as ours had been, not just by Rachel's death, but by the window of her writing provided on the Palestinian experience and by her call to action. The play, My Name is Rachel Corrie, is not just about how Rachel died, even if that is why she is known and remembered. It also illuminates her humanity, tracing her evolution from a typical teenager, self-exploring through her own political voice. The play also includes some writing that might not be considered complimentary to us, and even to her. Far better, though, that it is being a symbol of than her being a symbol of a one-dimensional character. So, yeah, it is actually one of my favourite plays, so I thought I'd talk about it a little bit.
I was just thinking, I haven't seen it, but I think the thing that makes it so powerful, why everyone's responding is, well, obviously 9/11 is such a big thing that happened to the world, but also it's very different to what we see on the main stage. As a musical, it's quite powerful because it's written a different way to the mainstream. I've listened to the soundtrack quite a bit. Even the songs are storytelling songs, so the songs tell the stories of the characters. There's one song, I think it's called Me in the Sky, and it tells Beverly Davis's experience. And she's the first female pilot for an American airline. And so it tells her whole story from her wanting to be a pilot when she was really little to going through those struggles to becoming the first female pilot and then getting the 9/11 incident happening and she having to take care of everyone, her crew as well as the passengers. So yeah, that was what I just found really interesting because my only other experience with Verbatim has been not on the main stage and not many people have talked about it, well as this musical is making it people seeing how powerful that is.
Okay, so in this section, we wanted to talk about the pros and cons of verbatim theatre. What are your thoughts on the pros of verbatim theatre? Because I have one here.
Yeah, go for it.
I wrote, because you're using people's real words and the particular way that they say things, I find the audience can relate to characters more, they see the characters more as real.
Yeah, I feel there's not I guess sometimes there is, but there's not that particular bias because you're using someone else's word. It's not your bias about that topic or whatever you're exploring with verbatim, but it's that person's bias, I guess, their experience, because you're portraying their experience with their words.
Yeah. I also wrote that it can be a way to present unfiltered and shocking accounts of particular instances or what is going on in people's lives.
Yeah, it creates a conversation with the audience. It's not just here's this fairy tale story, happy ending, watch it, absorb it, but you don't have to think about it. But actually it makes people think because they're like, oh, this actually happened to someone or someone actually said that.
Yeah, because it's verbatim, it carries more weight.
And again, with that, you can get away with a lot more with verbatim. So when I was talking about that show that we did where they talked about Stephen Hawking, you wouldn't be able to write that line into a script and get away with it. But because it's something that someone else has said, it's so quirky and ridiculous that it's okay.
People who are listening to this may be sort of wondering that, is this style of theatre like reality TV? But I have a quote from Jessica Bank and Eric Jensen. They're two journalists who study verbatim theatre. And they wrote, reality television and cable news don't ask us to identify, they ask us to judge, to stand outside what we are watching, even when we indulge in and are entertained by the spectacle of it. Narrative theatre asks us to stand inside, to identify with these characters at the heart of the story, to see those characters in ourselves and ourselves in them. So it's verbatim. Yeah, I would say that verbatim theatre asks you more to question the humanity of yourself and the character, whereas reality TV more asks you to mock the characters.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it asks you to, but it definitely makes it easy to, particularly with all the editing and the way that the producers have
Oh, you
ask
think
the
about
people
editing.
in the show to do things, right? The verbatim show, you will have to edit to make it make sense, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, you're not editing it to
I was
make your
actually-
point of view shown.
I was actually just saying, moving on to cons, you have a lot of ethical considerations with verbatim theatre. And
yes,
one is
yeah.
you can edit the
So
words in
many.
the one of these cons is that you can edit the words in a way that the subject may not like. So,
Yeah, you may twist the words or portray the character differently to how they actually are.
yeah. And
Like
when
often, I don't think it's intentional, but it definitely comes across different to how that person is.
Yeah, I actually have a quote here from some journalists and theatre makers here, and it says the subjects agree to testify for one reason: to set the record straight. And somewhere during the process of recording from the page to the rehearsal stage, that record is bound to get distorted. The nature of theatre ensures that the text undergoes constant revision night after night. Just as an actor can never give the same performance twice, so too is it impossible to remain completely faithful to the play's original subjects.
I was going to say another con is transcribing all those interviews. Like that time you and I spent 3 hours recording and then someone had to transcribe the interview back.
Oh, I hated transcribing. Remember when we did Esoteric and we just paid someone to do it for us?
That was the best time in my life. It wasn't 100% accurate, but it was on the right track.
It got the tone across, I reckon.
Yeah.
Here's a question for ethicalness. Do you invite the person to the performance?
I like the idea of inviting the person to the performance because you get to show them what you've done with it. But at the same time, like our lecturer said, it's scary because if you haven't portrayed them correctly in their opinion, they're probably going to be hurt or upset, right?
Yeah.
I guess it depends what you've done with that and whether you really want them to come or not.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there'd be many reasons to not invite them. But
I just thought of one. The only reason I wouldn't want them to come is when we did Q because of the people we interviewed and they were going to bring all their friends.
It would have been amazing, though.
Because they wanted everyone to be woke.
In New Zealand, we actually did have a conspiracy theorist come and see our performance. It was like on the second or third night. And
was this the woman I told you about, or was there another person?
Yeah. No, it was the woman you told me about. Wasn't she a flat earther?
Apparently. But I didn't have much of a chance to speak to her. So I don't know if it was just a joke her friend made or if she legitimately believes in flat Earth.
Remember when we were interviewing the first interview we did with the conspiracy theory people, and they're telling us all this insane stuff. You know, World War II didn't happen. The esoteric knowledge, satanic rituals, Hillary Clinton. You know, like eating babies. Abortion vaccines.
They were just frothing it because we had no knowledge and they were just giving us everything.
Yeah. And then at the end of the night, just be like, they're like, are you guys going to interview anyone else? I'm like, oh, yeah, we're planning on to. I'm like, oh, well, just don't put us in the same scene as a flat earther. Like, yes, because they're the crazy ones. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Did we put them in the same scene as a flat earther? I mean, kind of.
Oh, yeah. So in this section, we ask a question to our audience and give our thoughts and give theirs. This episode's question is, should an actor refuse to perform a part of a script if it deeply offends them? So I got a few answers off the social medias.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Brammer says, definitely not. It's the thoughts and words of the author and the chapter, not the performer, and therefore should be performed. It's not your story. If you're not happy, then don't take the job. Siobhan Peterson says, there's certain things I won't do. I've said no to a production of Drowsy Chaperone for this reason. Turning down work is never easy, but one's moral compass easily waves when hungry. If it doesn't feel right and you can afford to turn it down, then I say walk away. Jeff Davis says, no, it's not necessarily the point of theatre to be nice or to make people comfortable in the performance. Some of the best works of theatre are highly offensive and questionable. All the way back to the original motherfucker Oedipus. If theatre didn't have these types of stories and characters, we'd have nothing to ponder and discuss once the show is done. Rhonda Davison-Taylor says it depends on the message of the overall story. If my part is offensive, but the story is used to bring light to the offensiveness of my character, and maybe someone watching will be moved and think to act differently, then that's okay. If overall the story is offensive with no attempt to make a difference, then I would say no. Anonymous says, I think theatre is often a collaborative process, and I think the actor's autonomy is important, particularly if you're uncomfortable with something. That should be discussed and respected. But of course, like, some directors are like, yeah, nah, bad luck. In that case, it's your choice to stay on. You should probably either go or just leave. And Melanie, one of the melodramatics, I asked her this question and she sent in a written response. I think it depends on the script, for example. If you get the part of a character who's racist or sexist or something, that doesn't mean that you're being racist or sexist necessarily. It's all within the context of the play and the time it was written. I think a big part of being an actor is playing people who are not like yourself. I guess it depends on whether you want to view the character as an extension of yourself, as many do. Many actors take the part because it reminds them of a part of themselves, or is a bit like them. But you could totally oppose the character and still play the character very well. I guess it would depend on the intended audience and as to whether the actor thinks they should perform the part. I have often seen white actors play parts not intended for them, like in Hairspray on stage, which as much as I love Hairspray, I found it offensive. I even saw one production of it a few years ago where white actors got fake tans and wore black wig for those parts. This is part of the director's doing too, and I think if you don't have a specific cast to put up on the play respectively, such as Hairspray, you shouldn't be doing it. I found her point of many actors see the character as an extension of themselves very important.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I've never turned down a role, but I've definitely had to play characters that I felt very uncomfortable with. I end up just kind of doing it. But let's say that you're doing a play that's been written by the director. You haven't had, the director hasn't given out the whole script. You just have a little bit for the audition. And you read this character, you get the part and all that, yeah. And then reading the script, you find out that the character is doing something completely objectionable in your morals. And we'll say for no good reason. I think it's okay for you to drop out of the part or to ask that be revised. But what do you think, Lauren?
Well, first of all, I don't think the question should an actor. I think the question is more, is it okay for an actor to say no or reject doing something if it deeply offends them?
Okay, yeah.
For me personally, I think it is okay if it deeply offends you and you can't go on. Mm-hmm. I agree that, yes, when you first agree to that part, you should be very careful and aware of what your character potentially is going to do or say, and that should determine whether you accept the role or not. So for me personally as a Christian, I will look at a role and see, is there something that the character says or does that I'm really not going to be comfortable doing on stage? And that will affect my choices of whether I audition for it or whether I try and negotiate with the director whether I can get out of doing that. Particularly when I was at uni, there was an instance where it wasn't something that my character was doing, but it was something the whole group was doing that I felt uncomfortable with. Yeah, it wasn't so much that I refused to do it. I initially asked, can we either not do this scene or can I not be in it because I feel uncomfortable and I feel like personally I'm being mocked? Well, not me personally, but more my beliefs. So I felt really uncomfortable being in that scene. So I, presented those two options and then it came this whole big thing. So I think it's okay if you really feel uncomfortable about it or deeply offended. If you just really feel like you can't do it, I think you should negotiate with the director and see if there's a solution. And if not, then you probably should drop out.
Yeah, no, I agree.
In that particular example I just explained, it was you personally who said to me, you wouldn't make a Muslim girl eat pork on stage. Do you remember that?
No, and it's true.
Yeah.
And I know people will say there's a lot of meat substitutes and up there, so technically a Muslim could play it. But it's more the idea of it than anything else.
Yeah. So for that particular scene, it wasn't. Yeah. It was literally just the way that they were acting. They were acting over the top in terms of what that scene was. It was offensive. I mean, later on, I also felt the scene itself was offensive and wasn't really necessary to the play. But I was able to negotiate with the director and tell them how I was feeling. It didn't go great, but I think it's good to try and negotiate and tell the director where you're at and see where they're at in terms of why they might think that's important to be in the play. And I think it was Melanie or someone said, like, how the play is written, where it fits into the play, a significant part of the play, and you reject to play it, then you're going to have issues.
But also, I think that actors need to remember that no director has any right to make you relive past trauma through acting.
Yeah. No one can force you to do something you don't want to do at the end of the day.
Okay, so this section is Benny's Weird Theatre. So I find some weird theatre on the internet, and we have a look at it. This episode's theatre performance is Sailor Moon S. Sailor Moon S is a musical based on the manga of the same name, released in 1994. It's one of a set of musicals that ran from 1993 to 2005. There was over 500 performances, and how it sort of worked would be they would have 6 months, and like they would do one performance for 6 months, and then they would continue the story the next 6 months. And then they do like 6 months of those performances, then continue the story 6 months of those performances, if that makes sense. Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon. That's how it's translated, and I'm going to use the translated name.
Pretty Soldiers?
Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon.
Okay.
Yeah. It follows the magical action adventures of a teenage girl who learns of her destiny as a legendary warrior, Sailor Moon, and must band together with other Sailor Scouts to defend the Earth and the galaxy. She's always hungry as well, from what I remember. So, Lauren, what did we think of this performance?
Yeah. Look, I didn't hate it. I'm not a big fan of manga and anime and watching things with subtitles because I like to enjoy the visual. And so for me, when there's a subtitle, it's hard for me to enjoy both.
I didn't think it was a very visual performance to begin with.
No.
Especially, like, I know it's bad to compare it to the anime, but in the performance, they have barely any set. The lighting is okay, and their costumes are horrendous. But like, the stage just felt so empty all the time.
Okay. I didn't really feel that because I was watching a video, but maybe if I was there personally, it would feel quite empty.
Oh, I didn't see it personally. I'm not going to waste my time. What did you think of the... sorry, yeah, continue.
I thought in some scenes, they had a clever use of lighting and like sound effects and stuff. So, for example, there's that scene where, is it Yugi, the main girl who's Sailor Moon?
Yeah.
She is in the boat with the guy and they're making out or whatever, and then the other girl comes and she jumps out of the boat because she's trapped a tanty. And it's supposed to look like she's going to fall into the ocean, but turns out the ocean's frozen. And then at the end of that scene, it turns out that the frozen lake is starting to melt and she's like, oh no, I'm going to drown.
Yeah, because
and so the way that they show that, because they can't physically show you her drowning on stage without it looking dodgy. So they do a blackout and a splash sound. I thought that was quite clever of showing things you couldn't physically show on stage using lighting and sound elements instead.
That scene creeped me out because I started watching it and I'm like, wow, that girl looks like she's 16. And that guy looks
Sailor
like he's
Moon.
43. Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't really thinking about the ages.
And
The only time I thought of age was when the second girl came in. She looked like she was 10 and I'm like, is she supposed to look that? Like, how old is she? She's saying she's in love with this guy, but he's like clearly older. Like that was when I was like, yeah.
I was very uncomfortable with that. I actually did look up the girl who plays Sailor Moon to try and work out her age when she was doing it. So I have a little facts on her. So her name is Anza Oyami. She is a Japanese singer and actress, best known as the vocalist of the heavy metal band Headphones President, and for playing Sailor Moon in 13 separate musical productions. By my own mathematics, she was 18 when this performance was recorded. I do have a clip of her and her heavy metal band if you're interested.
Yes.
I'm going to splice this one in. So, yeah, not bad. I enjoyed it.
It doesn't sound like heavy metal. I don't know if that's because it's in Japanese, but
No.
I don't hate
I was very surprised that their wigs weren't sentient creatures.
it.
Like,
I was really curious about those wigs.
I thought those wigs were going to come to life. What did you think about the dance fighting?
Oh yeah, you're right. Their fighting was very dance-like. I really was annoyed by the fighting actually because they were doing stunts where they were obviously punching each other up, but you're not physically punching them. You could see that they weren't punching them. It was not done well.
And they had the fucking sound effects playing over it.
Yeah, like he punches him and he turns his head, but you can see that he's turning his head and it's not like hitting him and he's not in pain. It's like, could have done that better.
I wrote down here, every bad guy looks like an off-brand Star Trek villain.
What did you think of Tuxedo Mask when the bad guys, there was 5 of them and they're like, which one's the real one?
It was like a 60s sitcom joke.
It really was.
You know?
It took me a little while to realise it was the bad guys when 5 of them suddenly showed up. I was like, hang on, what's going on in this scene? I'm like, oh, right.
I was so
It's like he's saving the day, but the bad guys are there too.
Yes. I actually, because I'm a little bit of a weeb.
Yeah.
I have something interesting to say here. So when she's like in the lake, and those 2 Sailor Scouts show up and save her.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're actually Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah. And one thing I find interesting is that in the Japanese version of the anime, they're lovers. But when they brought it to
Uranus and Jupiter are lovers?
Uranus and Neptune.
Oh.
Yeah. But so in Japan they're just lovers. But when they ported it over to like Australia and America, they were like, yeah, none of that. So they redubbed it and just said that they were very close cousins.
Oh, I must have missed that.
Yeah.
Because they just come out of nowhere and I'm like, who are these people?
Oh, no, this is in the anime, the American anime.
Oh, okay.
But this actually caused a little bit of a problem because there are some episodes where they explicitly like mention they love each other.
Oh.
So it ended up that not only did people think that they're like, like lovers, they actually still thought they were cousins. So they thought that they were incestual lovers. So they had to do years later when they made the other dub, they had to clear up, no, they're lovers, but they're not related.
Oh boy.
Who is your favorite Sailor Scout?
Me?
Yes.
I didn't quite understand all of that because one minute they're high school girls and the next they're all in the sailor outfits and they're doing hero stuff.
Classic superhero. They are the Superman of Japan. I
did like Sailor Moon, I guess.
I was
in terms of character, there wasn't much to choose from. Nobody seemed to have a deep character.
Well, see deep characters, you should see the anime.
Oh boy. No, who's your favourite?
Oh, okay. Who's my favorite? My favorite is Sailor Jupiter.
Which one's she?
She's the one who has brown hair and is green.
Long brown hair?
Yeah, but that's just because she was my favorite when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I liked her too, but she's probably not